Welcome to the AI Ireland podcast, your window into the world of AI innovation on the island of Ireland. Join us as we explore how AI is harnessed to tackle both business and societal challenges, revealing the cutting-edge solutions emerging from this vibrant AI community. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates and insights in the world of AI. Hello everyone, it's Mark Kelly here. Welcome to the AI Ireland podcast, and I'm very, very happy to welcome Professor Alan Smeaton of Computing at DCU, and who's also the member of the Government's AI Advisory Council of the podcast. Alan, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Delighted to have the opportunity. Thanks for inviting me, Mark.
So Alan, your name is mentioned all the time in Ireland because you've been doing this when it wasn't in vogue quite a significant amount of time ago. And I'm sure you've probably kissed an awful lot of toads in that time, and you've got your hands dirty, but you are working with students still day to day, and you've got so many different hats from an industry perspective. I'd love to just give a bit of a rundown from yourself. You wouldn't mind letting the listeners hear about you.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been at Dublin City University as a professor for, let's just say, decades. Okay. And my original work was done in the area of information retrieval, which has now become popular as web search. And about 25 years ago, I started to look at other media. So I was developing AI techniques to analyze audio, to analyze speech, to analyze video, and then to basically do search and summarization and computer vision type applications. I found myself using AI as it has gone through the generations. So I was using rule-based systems, I was using neural networks, and then I was using generative AI. And then suddenly the rest of the world found out about generative AI 2 years ago when it reached huge scale. I continue to use pretty much all forms of AI because the others haven't gone away, you know. They're still active, they're still valid, they're still useful in day-to-day applications. And I both teach AI to students and I also use AI in my teaching. In other words, as part of the process of teaching to students.
So much to go to, but I'm going to jump into the teaching aspect. So I saw an Irish Times article piece just today. I didn't even read it. I just saw the caption, which was students cheating using AI, and I didn't delve in. Now, it might have been a clickbait scenario, but again, so this is where I kind of asked the question, right? Back in the 60s, 70s, you had a calculator, you walked in, you were frog marched out. Now, the large language models is that calculator, right, for text, right?
Yeah.
So I think students using it, right, I think that you know, the horse has gone out of the stable, as they say. So what's your take on that? How do you then empower your students to do it? Because it seems like it's a wonderful tool to start helping people do better work, right?
Yeah, so we are constrained in the educational way in that we have lectures and we have timetabled lab sessions and we have office hours and we have those typical delivery platforms. And what they do is they support the instructivist model. In other words, where there's an expert, a lecturer, a professor who stands up at the beginning of class, pronounces stuff, gives out content, and the students sit there meekly and then basically take it. And that model has been around since Socrates, and it is useful as a form of learning, but it's not the most useful form of learning. And the complement to that is what we call constructivist. In other words, where students learn themselves. Now, that doesn't mean skipping lectures. That means that they discover content and they learn things themselves from being in labs and from interacting with and creating their own content. And what generative AI does is it more easily facilitates that constructivist. So what I do in my teaching is I give lectures, I stand in front of classes, and that's the instructive Socrates type model. But then I also provide them with a teaching assistant, a virtual teaching assistant. What I did in the last semester was I teach about 140 students, they're marketing students, and I teach them data analytics, which is really hard stuff for them. And I give them lectures, I give them lab sessions, but then I've also fine-tuned an LLM to act as a teaching assistant for them. And I've incrementally fine-tuned that every week based on the lecture content, the slides, and the transcripts of the recordings of my lectures. So they can rock on up to this virtual teaching assistant, which is completely anonymously accessed, so I don't know who they are. And they can ask questions like, how much is the first assignment worth? When is the exam? What's a p-value? How do I do data imputation? And they can ask these kind of questions that they wouldn't ask me directly because they feel stupid, or they wouldn't ask the teaching assistant. And what's interesting about that was that I made that available to 140 students over a 12-week semester, and there were nearly 3,000 questions asked by the students. I don't know who they were, right? Because it's all anonymous. And second interesting aspect is that in the 24 hours before the written exam, there were 700 questions asked of the chatbot or of the teaching assistant. I went through about 700 of the questions just to see were the answers correct, and I didn't find one hallucination in that set. So there's an example of how we can use generative AI to complement the existing kind of teaching that we do, not to replace the teaching assistant. The TA was still there in the labs, and what he found was that the questions he was being asked were much harder questions. They weren't the silly questions, because they could just go to the chatbot and ask the silly questions and then come along with the harder. So he got much more better value, and the students presumably got better value out of the lab sessions.
With that example that I love is that your students are empowered to ask questions when they want, anytime, any day. You don't have to keep answering the same question to different students at different times. And then that application can be reimagined for every business or anywhere that can actually use it. So as a marketing professional, HR professional, onboarding, offboarding, wonderful. My follow-up question is, are you going to now introduce the Google Notebook LLM where you've got the avatars talking to each other and actually kind of maybe taking that journey as well?
Yeah, we haven't done that, and that's not the direction I'm going to pursue. The closest I've done to that is by having. We were particularly interested in biases that are present in the underlying training data that are used to power these and create these large language models. So I was particularly interested in the biases associated with gender, with age, with race and discrimination, etc. So one of the things we did was we created multiple LLMs, each one configured to identify and react to a different kind of bias. And then we had these LLMs talking to each other and collaborating. So when you'd input a query and then you wanted, or a prompt rather, and you were getting answers, the answers were not coming from a single LLM trained on content, but came from the vote or the collaborations of multiple LLMs, each of which had a different perspective. So the analogy is like you asking me a question and me saying, well, hang on a second, I have a committee of people here, and the committee would have a meeting and discuss your question and offer pros and alternatives, and eventually days later, we come up with the committee response, and then we give you the response in which all underlying bias potentials for different biases had been eliminated, and we came up with like the official response. Now, that was an example of how you can get LLMs and pre-configured LLMs talking to each other, specifically in a bias detection and mitigation type application. But and that's different from the question you asked me, which is about using it in education. But both cases just show that there should not be, and people should be wary of using one LLM and being bound into one LLM. One of the things I advise people when they're starting to get into generative AI is don't be stuck with just the one large language model. Use Gemini, use Claude, use LLM, use Copilot, use a variety of them. There's a platform called Chatbot Arena. And what it does is it allows comparisons between different LLMs. And one of the reasons I go to that on a regular basis is to see what is their body count on the number of large language models. And it's up at 149. There's 150 large language models available to us, and we shouldn't just be locked into any one or any subset of them.
Yeah, I use 5, but when you think of it, when you put it like that, that's absolutely incredible. So actually, just on that point, what do you think about the AI agents world that we're actually now coming into, where you've got these different types of agents all working together to help provide a solution for you or your business? I think of a simple one where I lose my phone and then I have to go up to the branch center to get a new phone replacement. I have to look at 302 or whatever different stores that are there, Vodafone, and then go through a whole kind of thing where an agent can do all this. And now with a platform coming out that actually the AI agent can now make a purchase on your behalf, it becomes really interesting into the world of Copilot and these different types of companies of what the businesses can now be able to offer as additional services.
Yeah, I'm wary of that. I think that there's a great vision of agents and agentic systems which can do that kind of thing, and that has a lot of appeal. Although at the same time, sometimes we're a bit reluctant to let control go, right? If you've ever sat into a driverless car in one of the US main cities and sort of it started to go, there's an initial feeling of, oh my God, I'm not in
Yeah.
control, and there's the same kind of thing with agentic systems which can go and replace your phone. I think they are an appeal, but they require a lot of underlying AI and LLM technology to be in place. They require it to be able to understand facts based on their background knowledge. If they require facts to be linked to background knowledge, they require it to be able to draw inferences from facts and to stitch these things together with kind of deductive reasoning with no potential, no possibility for any kind of hallucinations. So if A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, then A is bigger than C. That's a logical deduction. They also require the processing to identify contradictions, which is to recognize when facts, either deducted facts or provided facts, are incompatible with each other and therefore lead to inconsistency. And I think we're still a long way from that, from LLMs. I think that's the kind of thing that we were working on when we were looking at rule-based artificial intelligence 10, 20 years ago. And we never got that to scale because data-driven AI took over and replaced that. So I'm still um, cautious and skeptical about these agentic AI systems being rolled out with the rapidity that some business are pointing at, because I don't think we're there yet. I think the underlying logic processing isn't there to sustain that, and I think I'd be very cautious and skeptical about that.
So there's one thing that I really, really love that you kind of shared, I think this last couple of weeks was on, and again, we've all got electricity bills, well, most of us who will probably be listening to pay. And what you were doing is you were talking a little bit about smart meters and the ability to kind of leverage some of the data and some of the opportunities within that. Would you mind kind of sharing some of the insights within that?
Sure, yeah. So we have an investment in installing smart meters into homes and businesses in Ireland. There's about 1.8 million of them installed already. What they do is that they gather data on the energy that you have used every 30 minutes. And if you have microgeneration, if you've got solar panels, for example, then it gathers data on the amount that you would export to the grid every 30 minutes. And then once a day, it exports all of that data from your house and from mine back to ESB networks. And that data is used by the energy companies. So we have ESB networks, which controls the network. And then we have about 14 different energy companies that we buy our energy or buy our electricity and gas from. So that data is used for them to calculate their bills. And it allows you to move from a tariff where you have a fixed rate throughout 24 hours. So it's, 30 cent for a kilowatt hour, or you can use a smart or a time of use tariff. So it's more expensive between 5 and 7 and less expensive during the night if you wanted to charge an EV. But we have to make a blind decision and choice of which smart meter tariff to use and which energy provider to use. And there's about 60 of them available. So it's like looking at a box of chocolates, except not knowing what any of them tastes like. And the comparator websites like Bonkers and Switcher assume that everybody uses the same amount of energy, 4,200 kilowatt hours. But we don't. We use different amounts of energy and we have different patterns because you may be living alone, you may have a large family, and maybe in a large house, a small house, it may be an apartment, you may have solar, you may charge an EV, you may be energy conscious, you may be well insulated, you may have a heat pump, everything all makes us different. And our patterns of use are captured in our smart meter data, which we don't use to help us choose the best tariff. So what we did was we built a system which encourages people to go to the ESB Networks website, just register on the website, input your own unique meter number, and download your data, which is an enormous big CSV file. We then ask you to upload that file to our website. We then run your actual usage through all 60 different tariffs, and then we email you back how much each tariff would have cost you in the last year. And the amount of the variety between the cheapest and the most expensive is always at least twice. So if you're paying €1,000 a year, and that's the cheapest, the most expensive is possibly €2,000 a year. And you have to make that choice, blind choice, as to which tariff to choose from. We introduced a bit of clever AI with this because of the fact that smart meters have been rolled out, every day, many people won't have a year of past usage. So if you come along and say, well, I only have my smart meter for 4 months, well, you can do that, but 4 months in summer is going to be very different from 4 months in winter time, etc. So what we do if you don't have a full year is that we ask you to upload your data, and then we compare your usage for those 6 or 7 months that you do have data with hundreds of other people. And then we find from that the group of people whose usage patterns are closest to yours, and then we backfill to give you a full 12 months of data. So you might have 6 months of real data and 6 months of artificially AI generated data. And that allows you to get a full 12-month picture, which will include the differences between summer, spring, winter, and autumn.
It's fascinating because I take this really personally, because I was literally asked that question where a utilities company rang me up and said, do you want to switch over? And I was like, yeah, because I've just got the new smart meter. Yeah, that makes sense. And I was like, what am I signing up to? And then I got again, and what you make the best decision thinking, well, that probably is me. But it's like, well, why would it be me? Because the reality is we're very different in so many other situations, our personal shopping, all these different things. So why would it be similar for energy consumption? I love the way people can actually go and do that. What a wonderful application for people that's actually going to save them significant amount of money. And people just want to know if they're using the right plan anyway. Just, even if it wasn't money, you just want to know to have that accessibility and stuff like that. So that is a fantastic application of it, which is brilliant. When you look at, and I feel kind of guilty because we've done like 155, maybe 160 episodes now of the podcast, and the last year or so, it's just really been about generative AI, right? And we're going like 6 years plus now, and I kind of feel like we're forgetting about everything else. But the conversation and the money just seems to be in large language models. And I think even last year, when you look at the investment in AI outside of large language models, AI investment had actually dropped a little bit. So it was interesting to see that businesses still see a huge benefit of this, that they're plowing so much crash in. So where do you feel on the hype versus bubble kind of scenario that we're in? Because like there's so much money and infrastructure getting put into this. And I think it was 600 billion Sequoia said, like that was a couple of months ago in terms of what they were quoting. So again, I can only imagine what it is now.
Yeah, I look back in the history, and it's often been mentioned that there have been AI summers and AI winters, and we're presently in the summertime. And I wonder, are we getting to the stage of an Indian summer, to use that metaphor? In other words, is it September or October, but the sun is still shining in this AI world? I think a lot of it is driven by capitalism, by the hype associated with the huge investments. And I hope we get a soft landing when some of these, like we were talking about previously in agent-based systems, when some of these don't realize their heightened level of expectation. I think the return on investment for these massive numbers is I don't have an awful lot of faith in it. I think that we will get a landing. I think we will get a rollback. I hope that there is not consolidation among the AI companies. 25 years ago, we had web search engines. We used to have dozens of web search engines. We had companies like Lycos and Ink2Me and Webcrawler and Ask Jeeves and Yahoo and Excite and InfoSeek. And there was one called Google as well. All of the others disappeared, and they were all consolidated into one market dominance for web searching. And I hope that the same thing does not happen for large language models, that we don't have one model to bind them all. I hope we have the diversity, and I hope when the reckoning and the shakeout of and the realization of the heightened levels of expectation is toned down, that we're left with multiple players with language models. I suspect that will be the case because all of the big tech companies are active in this area, and they won't all disappear in 5 or 10 years. So I suspect that we will have multiples.
And a question was asked to me out of the kind of the major 7, maybe more, depending on where you want to go with that. Which ones will win, right? And I was thinking, which ones will last? And I was thinking, well, you know what? There might be a new one that will just turn up, and that could be the one that actually people go to. So it might necessarily be the way you think it's actually going to play out. So it's really, really fascinating. And there's over like 100,000 products and services now that have AI in them. So they're all looking for users. Yeah. An awful lot of them are in beta. So the product isn't great, but there are some ones that are particularly helpful. But then you've got regulation to make sure that these are adhering by the regulation. And that becomes extra complicated in terms of what you can offer and what you don't, and did you opt in, did you not? So it's going to be a really interesting kind of 6 to 12 months in terms of how this plays out for companies. For a lot of companies, they don't know that by February of this next year, they have to provide some type of AI literacy training to their employees, and making sure that they're up to speed with that. So it's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah, and to go back to the companies and the somebody coming from the outside, if it's a horse race and you're into betting, then the long odds would be put on a company like Anthropic, which comes not with the history or with the heritage of having large investment, but with the track record of their performance. The other major players, so you're looking at Meta, you're looking at Google, you're looking at even Apple, are dipping into and using large language models, but they have their history and they have their reputation to lean on. But the one which doesn't have, the complete outsider, would be Anthropic with the Claude LLM. So that would be the equivalent of a long odds bet, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny, I mix between them all for different things. Right. I also found Perplexity really helpful in terms of that real-time information and insights that are there. And we didn't even go into prompt engineering, but as people start to feel more comfortable with the prompts and they'll start to get value out of them, there's a real art to actually do that. Yeah. But what I always say to people is, if you're not necessarily good at prompt engineering, you can always say to the LLM, create me the perfect prompt for this outcome, and it will actually do that. So there is ways around it. Alan, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. I've been speaking to Alan Smeaton, Professor of Computing at DCU, a member of Government's AI Advisory Council. Thank you again.
Thanks, Mark.
Membership of AI Ireland placed the organisation at the centre of the fastest growing technology sector in the world today. As a member, you'll have access to our diverse and highly engaged professional community, which is committed to driving artificial intelligence forward in Ireland. Membership of AI Ireland is for any organisation employing data and analytics. We offer memberships to corporate, government and SME organisations. Interested to find out more? Contact Mark at AIawards.ie.